Broughan.
Thanks, Ken Corla, and I'd also like to warmly congratulate our wonderful football team for their outstanding victory last night, and to wish them well in Lyon on Sunday. Tánaiste, the last St Valentine's Day during the general election campaign, it marked the 35th anniversary of the horrific Stardust nightclub fire, in which 48 young people, mostly teenagers, died, and in which over 200 other, again, mostly teenage citizens of my area were seriously injured. Over the past 35 years, the Stardust Relatives and Victims Committee, as you know, courageously led by Miss Antoinette Keegan and Miss Chrissy Keegan and Miss Gertrude Barrett, they've fought for justice for those victims, for the families, and they've been in touch with you, of course, many times as Minister for Justice. The Keane Tribunal report, of course, in 1982, it severely criticised the Paddy and Eamon Butterley, the owner and manager of the Stardust, for their reckless disregard for the safety of the people on the premises. But its conclusion, of course, of arson outraged the communities on the north side, and despite Keane's severe criticism of the Butterleys and Dublin Corporation, and a huge file being sent to An Garda Síochána, no prosecution, of course, was ever taken against the owners or against Dublin Corporation. Now, since the late 1990s, as I think you know well, the conclusions of the Keane Tribunal have been systematically demolished by the finding of new and unassessed evidence. In 2001, for example, a brilliant investigation called They Never Came Home, after the song by Christy Moore, carried out by Tony McCulloch, the editor of Northside People, and his colleague Neil Featherstone-Haw, found, of course, that there were major deficiencies in the electrical and heating systems of the building, and the eyewitness accounts which hadn't been taken into account during the Keane investigation. A number of primetime programmes on the 20th and 25th anniversary also seriously undermined the credibility of Keane. A distinguished local Northside scientist, Miss Geraldine Foy, she also carried out a detailed investigation in 2004 and collated new decisive evidence and found the existence of a first-floor storeroom full of flammable cleaning liquids, of which the Keane Tribunal, of course, seemed to be completely unaware. Based on some of those discoveries, in 2006 and the 25th anniversary, I called for a new commission of investigation, and I'm renewing that call again today. In July 2008, of course, Taoiseach Bertie Ahern, who lived across the road from the nightclub, he appointed Mr Paul Coffey to carry out a study of the papers of the Keane Tribunal and to look again at the evidence. And although his report, of course, exonerated the young people in that it found that arson was not the cause, Mr Coffey, of course, didn't come forward with a new investigation, didn't ask for a new commission investigation. But he did say, as you know, in his draft report, he said that I accept that a new inquiry is necessary. Now, during the last election, my final point, Laskin Corla, during the 2011 election, the Taoiseach, accompanied, I think, by your former colleague, Mr Terence Flanagan, made an absolute commitment to the Stardust Relatives and Victims Committee that we would have a new commission of investigation. But over the past 5 years, your predecessor, Mr Shatter, and yourself, in fact, I think, have stonewalled this strong desire. You can bring closure, Tánaiste, to this matter, just like in the case of Widgery.
Okay, well, let's bring an answer
and
now
in the case of Hillsborough, you can ease the pain, the awful pain that hundreds of families in my constituency have suffered for the past 35 years.
Thank you very much. Tánaiste.
As the Deputy is aware, I have met with the Stardust Victims Committee and heard their concerns about this how this tragedy has been investigated. As you rightly say, Deputy, there have been a number of reports to date, and what I have done in the Department of Justice is put in place a process whereby the committee can liaise very directly and intensively with officials of my department who have given a huge amount of time to this issue over recent months. The reason we've done that is to ensure that a comprehensive submission outlining all of the materials that the committee wish to have considered in this regard are brought forward. I do believe that significant progress has been made in relation to that process, and I would like the committee to continue to engage. Now, what I have said is that, and what's in the programme for government, it has a commitment that full regard will be had to any new evidence that can definitively prove the cause of the Stardust fire. And I am committed to working on the families should they wish to continue to engage with us on this process. I believe that the engagement in this way, and they are bringing forward a range of issues in relation to the cause of the fire, but also certain support for the work of the committee, which they've identified, which they feel that they were not given previously, and the issues have arisen. I won't go into detail on those issues here, but they've brought forward a range of issues in relation to support from government for the work of the committee. But we are certainly committed to continue to engage in the process, and as I say, if new evidence emerges, and if we believe that it is new evidence, and the committee are convinced that it is new evidence, then we can certainly progress it further. But that is ongoing at present, Deputy, that work.
Thanks, Can. Well, there is a motion, as you know, before the House, which I think has widespread support in the name of Independence for Change in our group, and also of the AAA and People Before Profit. But I think there's widespread support. I remember Deputy MacDonald of Sinn Féin, for example, standing beside me at the 35th commemoration. There's widespread support, I think, for you as well to put your names on that motion and to set up the commission. I've heard over the years, of course, this mantra from Minister Shatter and yourself about new evidence, but surely the litany of private investigations and outstanding investigations by journalists, I mentioned a few of them, Ms Rita O'Reilly of RTE and others, over the years, they have created, I think, a whole category of new evidence, that wasn't assessed at the time, which people didn't bring to the attention of the Keene Tribunal. There was obviously deficiencies in the forensic examination by Garda Síochána and the Department of Justice. So it does seem to me that mantra doesn't work anymore. I mentioned, by the way, the Widgery Tribunal in relation to Derry and Hillsborough. There seems to be a very great reluctance in your and previous governments to review the work of an actual tribunal. But in 2010, Tony Blair brought forward, as you know, the Savile inquiry and to exonerate the people of Derry for the whitewash that happened in Widgery. We know the long struggle of the families of the 96 Liverpool fans to get justice, and they had a new inquest, as you know, just a few months ago, which reported an unlawful killing. Mr. Antoinette Keegan and her colleagues, they have carried on, I think, a very similar struggle for justice. They deserve a similar response from the government. I see beside you Deputy Broughan there, who's represented the area also for
we need
about
to conclude
35
now,
years
Deputy
throughout
Broughan,
this time,
please.
and also Deputy McGrath, and I'd ask for their support. I mean, this seems to have been, Minister, perhaps the greatest cover-up, one of the greatest cover-ups in Irish history, and whether it's Deputy Rabbit, and I did receive a lot of support from my former party, starting with Deputy Dick Spring in this regard.
Right.
Deputy Rabbit called it a case of corporate manslaughter and the possibility of an unlawful killing. So I would ask you urgently to set up a commission investigation and to bring closure for the families who
Thank
are
you, Deputy Broughan. I regret to inform members that the time, a minute is a minute. Notwithstanding the enormity of the importance of the issue you raise, I could plead with members, please, to abide by the clock. Well, okay, fair enough. Well, may you have many opportunities in the future, Deputy Broughan.
Deputy, I do recognise what you say about previous injustices, and one should always look at the evidence and have an open mind and not rule out the possibility of a further inquiry or commission of investigation in appropriate circumstances. And that's why we have been engaging with the committee over recent months and analysing very carefully and taking very seriously the evidence that they are presenting, and analysing whether it would, if you like, lead to a further investigation. So it is being looked at very seriously. But I think you would agree with me as well that one would want to, given that that a previous government asked for a second report and had a very detailed report which drew certain conclusions, one has to consider it very carefully. Obviously, we're all aware of as the Ceann has said, the scale of the tragedy. But as I say, we are engaged with the committee and will continue. And as in the programme for government, we have said, if there is new evidence, that certainly that issue can be obviously considered and looked at again.
Thank you very much, Tánaiste. Deputy Catherine Murphy.